Hello, everybody, and welcome. We are going to take another minute or two to gather. Glad to have everybody joining us. So good morning or good afternoon, rather, everyone. My name is Nadia Sritsky, and I am the Professional Practice and Advocacy Consultant with the Nova Scotia College of Social Workers. Welcome to our second session of education on medical assistance in dying and the new professional standards for social workers. Today, we will be focusing upon ethics and how to handle some of this. This session, along with the first session and the third session that will be November 17th, will all be recorded and available to you all afterwards. Feel free to unmute yourself, rename yourself, turn off your camera if you do not wish to be recorded, but it will really only be myself or whoever's speaking who is spotlighted who will be recorded along with the screen share. And if you have questions, please feel free to put that in the chat. So I would like to begin first and foremost with a land acknowledgement. I would like to begin by acknowledging that I am speaking from Mi'kma'ki, and indeed the Nova Scotia College of Social Workers is in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq, whose inherent rights were recognized in the peace and friendship treaties that were signed from 1725 to 1779. This series of treaties did not surrender Indigenous land, resources, or sovereignty between nations. The treaties were later reaffirmed by Canada in Section 35 of the Constitution Act in 1982, and they remain active to this day. The Nova Scotia College of Social Workers joins our members and our communities in the necessary labor of reconciliation, and we are grateful to live and work together as treaty people in Mi'kma'ki. Please think of the lands, territories, and Indigenous people who lived and continue to live within these lands, and how each of us individually and as a collective body of social workers can hold ourselves accountable to reconciliation with Indigenous peoples here and across Turtle Island. We are all treaty peoples. Lalayu, thank you all. I want to also take this moment to thank the volunteers of the Medical Assistance in Dying Working Group, which is a subcommittee of the newly forming Professional Standards Committee, for all of their time and hard work in developing these proposed standards that we will be discussing today. I want to especially thank Linden, Hardie, and Dominic who are helping to facilitate today's session. Before we begin, I do want to say that this session counts as an ethics session, and I hope that you all are very familiar with on our website, our ethical decision-making tool, which is an interactive way to think about different ethical dilemmas, and that helps you connect to different aspects of the Code of Ethics. Reminder, each of the 6 of our current Code of Ethics, which thankfully is being reformulated and updated to include more explicit anti-racist values and to be reflective of the decolonizing stance that values Indigenous values explicitly. But our current Code of Ethics certainly does also reflect those same values, just a little less explicitly. They are respect for inherent dignity and worth of persons, pursuit of social justice, service to humanity, integrity in professional practice, confidentiality in professional practice, and competence. And of course, An ethical dilemma is a time when one or more of these values might appear to be in conflict. And when we have situations like this, you can easily go to your website, to this ethical decision-making tool, and click on it. This gives you an idea of how that might work. So, for example, the code of ethics that pertains to an individual dilemma might have to do with the inherent dignity and worth of persons, service to humanity, integrity, and confidentiality. Those might be some of the ethical dilemmas that we will be discussing today, for example. And you can always click on things to have more information. And don't forget also this, this sort of ladder of ethical principles with at the bottom, the truthfulness and full disclosure, and at the top, protection of life, equality and inequality being the top principles. So just a reminder of that as we will be fleshing all of this out in greater detail. And with that, I am going to now invite Linden to begin and to lead us through some of this interactive ethical conversation that we will be having about the concrete application of the medical assistance in dying guidelines that we presented more broadly last week. Linden, you are.
Thank you.
Okay, there you are.
Took me a second to find that. Okay, thanks, Nadia. Thanks, everyone. I'm hoping everyone can see what is intended on the screen. Afternoon, everybody. As Nadia said, my name is Linden, and I am the Social Work and Programs Manager with Hospice Halifax. So I'm going to kind of chat today with the overarching theme of being the practical and ethical implications for social workers in Nova Scotia, working within MAiD, and then Dominic and Nadia are going to help out in a couple ways to kind of bring some of this material to life. So to begin, though, to give you a bit of an overview of our hope today, knowing that we just have the hour, so we'll see what we can get to in the time that we have. I will start by talking a little bit about my practice context. So while this is a session about MAiD and social work, so social workers generally, I'm going to talk a little bit about the specific context of hospice, because that's really a contributing factor in terms of some of the scenarios and some of the pieces I'll be talking about today. And then how that relates in terms of how we've been navigating MAiD within the hospice context here in Halifax. We'll then do some discussion. So no fear, you will not be required to do role plays publicly, anything like that, but we will have some scenarios that I've encountered in my practice here at hospice. And we'll be discussing those as either a large group or as small groups, depending on how the day or how the morning goes. And so we will give you some chance to kind of ask questions. And then with once time allows, we'll talk a little bit about how we handled it here and how that might differ from how you folks proceeded and brainstormed with that. And then if there is room, I'd love to hear from other folks about if they have any personal practice examples they want to highlight. So hopefully we'll have time for that, but feel free at any point to toss those in the chat as well as things come up. So this is just a photo of the hospice. Folks are still learning about hospice. It's still very new for Nova Scotia, but this is just the lovely photo of the building, just to give you to place it in time. We're just located on Franklin Street in the south end of Halifax. And we've only been open for just over 2 years. So we opened in May 2019. So that is helpful as well for folks to know, is that this has only been a couple of years worth of experiences. We've had around 300 admissions since opening. And so majority of the folks who have been admitted have died here. There is a small number of folks who have been discharged for a variety of reasons, but that also gives you a sense of the number of folks that we've worked with at end of life. They've ranged in age from their 20s to over 100, so a pretty broad spectrum in terms of age. And the average length of stay, again, so you guys have a sense of the timeline, is around 3 weeks. So of course we have folks who are with us shorter or longer, so maybe days, under a week, or months, but the average length of stay is about 3 weeks. And about 50% of our patients have come from home, about 50% from hospital. So that also gives you a breakdown in terms of where folks are coming from and what sort of care circles they've been part of before coming to hospice. And cancer remains to be the primary diagnosis for most of our patients, but there are a variety of other primary diagnoses that do come up from time to time, but cancer remains the majority. And we do tend to operate with a bit of a wait list. So some folks aren't admitted to hospice. We are not able to take everybody. There's a variety of reasons why. Sometimes it just pertains to there not being a vacant bed. Sometimes folks' needs, their care needs may not be appropriate, or maybe their goals of care don't align with what we're able to offer, or maybe they have died before a bed is available. So that gives you kind of a general sense. I know a lot of it is numbers, but just to kind of talk a little bit about the context of hospice. And then to kind of expand on that, so it is hospice palliative care. That is the approach to care here at Hospice Halifax. And for folks to be admitted, and bear with me, because this all does kind of pertain to why then, or for some people, why MAiD becomes their choice. So folks are admitted with the understanding that they have a prognosis of about 3 months or less. So it is end of life care. That is the expectation. Of course, as many of you know, it is really hard to prognosticate that specifically, but we do ask for care providers to kind of give a general sense to think that folks are anticipated to die maybe within the next few months. And we do have a built-in interdisciplinary team. So social work is part of the care team. It's a range of teams. We have our nursing team, our physicians, we have our food service, we have volunteers, housekeeping, music therapy, counseling. So it is an interdisciplinary team, which means all of those services are on hand and available the majority of the time. So that's an important piece that may come up a little bit later too. And it is important to also highlight that we attempt to operate from a patient family-centered care lens. So of course, the patient is the primary care recipient. Most of them are driving their care needs while they're here, but we do try to include their family, their friends, their circle of care in our approach. So communication and open communication and who's included in the conversations is really important as well. So that's the practice context. And then building on that again, so bear with me, is that we do have an organizational policy on MAiD. So there's lots of kind of myths that fly around hospice because it is organizationally, some hospices, depending on their service agreements and how they operate and whether or not they're under certain guiding factors, everybody can be a bit different across Canada. But in terms of how we operate, the expectation is that folks do not come to hospice for the sole purpose of receiving MAiD. So that's not the intention, is that hospice becomes a space that people need to go to receive MAiD. Though folks can come to hospice to receive hospice care for a variety of reasons. And then if they identify that MAiD is their preference, their wish, then of course we would support folks through that process. So that's kind of I know it doesn't seem super distinct. It's a little bit nuanced, but there is an importance to kind of make that statement. With folks as well in the MAiD context within hospice, death is reasonably foreseeable for everybody here because they would not be admitted to hospice if death wasn't foreseeable. So that's an important thing to capture. I know with the changing legislation and things like that, and some of this will be touched on in the third session, but that is an important piece for today. And we do have sort of a really ready availability of attending physicians. So recognizing that we have access, that folks can do assessments and referrals fairly efficiently within this care model because we have physicians built into our team who are here on a regular basis. We also have lots of opportunities for open communication for care planning and family meetings to kind of come together and discuss people's preferences, their plans, their wishes, conflicts, concerns. So that's another part I like to highlight, is that we are kind of always, or at least attempting to always, be in conversation with each other about how people would like their death to be and how they'd like their life to be up until their death. And another part to note as well is social work involvement is pretty much automatic. So I am in the fortunate position where I don't need to wait for a referral. I can just insert myself right away. Well, we do operate with referrals, and because of the finite number, so it's only 10 beds, so there's a cap in terms of the number of people who can be here at a time. I do have that, I would say, kind of a privilege to be able to be involved. And then finally, I think in the past 2 years, we don't actually track this data. So it is an estimate based on memory. But I'd say, and I kind of checked in with some colleagues to make sure this is accurate, I'd say we maybe had about 15 to 20 deaths using MAiD in the last couple of years since we've opened. So again, just to give you a sense of where these scenarios come from, I'm going to try to keep things as obviously as confidential as possible. We've taken all the identifying information out of it. But because of the small pool of deaths that have happened, you may note some kind of unique aspects as a result. I'm going to pause and take a breath here because I speak quickly, but also just to give a chance in case there's any questions about the context before we move on, just because these are important components.
Again, please feel free to put your questions in the chat if you have them. And Linden, I'm not seeing any, so feel free to take another deep breath. And I know we've got so much to cover and we're trying to fit it in an hour, but thank you so much.
Okay, all right, I'll carry on, but feel free, especially as we move into the scenarios, if there's any of these pieces that folks want to tackle back in or have me review again, just let me know. We can always circle back. Okay. So rather than me kind of talking at you all about some of the kind of practical and ethical implications that I've encountered in my practice, we decided to kind of make this a bit more of an engaging process. So I did pull a variety of scenarios. They have all happened in my time at hospice. So they are all based in experience. And so what we're actually going to do is take some time to kind of unpack them together because you all come with experience and there will likely be viewpoints and things that you identify in these scenarios that I did see or I did not see. So I'm really interested to see and give folks a chance to kind of unpack them together. You're going to first see Dominic and Nadia. They're going to role play a scenario for you just to offer some different levels to this presentation. And then you're going to break up into smaller groups and just talk it through a little bit. We're going to report back to the larger group. If time allows, we're going to give a chance if folks want to, again, in the chat, or if they want to unmute to kind of share any insights or conversation points or challenges that they had as a group. And then we're going to do that again, but not with the role play. So you're then going to be broken up into small groups and you're each going to be assigned a scenario. And we're going to take some time to debrief. And I'll tell you about how we handled it here at that time, for better or for worse, and see how that aligns with what you folks determined in your discussions. So just to recap, the first one, Nadia and Dominic are going to do a role play. You'll sit, you'll listen, you'll then be broken up into small groups to talk it through a little bit. And I do have some questions here to kind of give you some focus to talk about any practical issues that you see or foresee, any ethical issues, how you may have navigated this as a social worker, who, if anyone else, would you have liked to consulted before proceeding? So there are some questions to direct your conversation if you like. But before we do that, I will give Nadia and Dominic a little nod. So just listen to the kind of details that they're going to be sharing. It's going to be a short role play where Nadia is the social worker and Dominic is the patient. And then we'll break out, we'll take a minute and break out to discuss.
All right, so I'm going to maybe try side-by-side mode. No, that's not going to work. I'm going to just stop the sharing for a moment so you can see us. So I am the social worker. I'm going to take a moment, enter my social work mode. And hi, Dominic, how are you doing today? I just wanted to stop and check in with you.
Well, I appreciate you coming by. I've got some news for you. I've been doing a lot of thinking about my circumstances, and I've been talking to the doctor about the idea of using the medical assistance in dying. And in so doing, I've decided that I'd like to proceed with this process. I understand that the doctor is making a referral, and that's been done now. And the next step is an assessment. And I'm feeling kind of relieved now that I've made that choice.
You're feeling relieved.
Yeah, it's been on my mind quite a bit, and there's various ins and outs to it, of course. So, but yeah.
How are your family feeling?
Oh, that's that's something that I'm not quite relieved about. I haven't talked to them about this decision. I think some of them might know that I have been thinking a bit about it, but I really didn't want them to be involved. I felt it was my decision, and I didn't want to feel, sort of pressured in one way or another by them. Some of them might think I might be, like committing suicide or something. They might give me a hard time about it, and so yeah. At this point in time, I feel like I'd rather they didn't really know that I've decided this.
You'd rather that all the members of your family not know because you're concerned of feeling judged? Is that?
Yeah, well, that's yeah, kind of how I'm feeling. When you say all the family, I don't know. I don't
Like your
maybe there's
daughter, your wife, are you
yeah,
concerned
like
about them making you feel judged?
yeah, maybe there's one or two that I might be able to tell, but I guess I got to think that through some more. It's kind of tricky, but yeah, I felt part of me feels like it's a private decision, like it's really got to be me that makes that decision and not kind of burden them to involve them, and they might want to try and make the decision for me or
Mhm,
influence me in some way. But this is my decision, and
mhm.
I'm
Sure.
feeling that
Well,
way.
and I know when we were talking in the family meeting last week about the different stages of dying and um, discussing with them things that they might see, they seemed really upset. And I'm wondering how that might have impacted you.
Yeah, and I think that if they just sort of felt that I just died naturally, they might feel better about that, and maybe they just don't need to know that I'm going to slip away privately, and they can just assume that I was just dying a natural death that way.
And did you talk with the doctor about the differences in that dying process and how that might be different?
Um, well, we didn't really get into it that way. I think the doctor just felt that he needed to make sure that I knew what I was doing, and I had the right to make this decision for myself, and I was aware I was aware of what I was intending, and aware of the consequences, etc. So he was asking questions like that, like, does this guy have the ability to make that decision for himself? That's what he told me he had to be clear about. So, and he felt that he could make the referral. So,
And you feel relief right now.
yeah.
All right, end scene.
Thank you, Nadia and Dominic.
So I'm going to add, oh, that is not who I meant to add. Hi. I was, okay, there you go. So I was trying to get Linden and add Linden to this. There she is. So Linden, I don't know if you want to share your screen again briefly and kind of go over what you wanted to
Sure.
have us discuss.
Yeah. So just to highlight, Nadia was the social worker and Dominic was the patient, and kind of some of the key things from that exchange is Dominic is a patient receiving end-of-life care. He was admitted to hospice. He started the process in pursuing MAiD with the physician, and a referral is being submitted. And then informing the social worker, Nadia, about this, talked a bit about his feelings around his family, around how much he wants them to know or not know, and his feelings in terms of his sense of relief about that process, and being a bit unsure in terms of how open to be. And Nadia kind of tapped on like the sense of stigma or judgment that Dominic may be feeling and some of his hesitation. So those are the key things to just discuss. So again, I'm going to have you guys break up into groups, try to touch on like what practical or ethical issues you see. I know you don't have all the information, so just use your imagination. And then how you may have navigated this as a social worker, either in the conversation with Dominic or going forward. And if there's anyone you'd like to engage in this conversation or consult. And when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about how we handled it here. So I'll hand it over to Nadia to break up into groups, and I'll put those questions in the chat maybe.
Thank you, everyone. And I am going to pause the recording now. And I am going to ask Linden to please lead us in that conversation.
Sure. Thanks, everybody. I hope I was part of a group, so I hope that folks had a chance to talk through it a little bit. So in the next couple of minutes, feel free, if you have highlights from your group discussion that you want to toss in the chat for everybody to see, feel free. And then there'll also be space if anybody would like to unmute and share some highlights from their group. But I'll just start by highlighting a couple pieces from the group that I was a part of. I mostly was a listener. But folks already started to kind of hit on some of the key things that did come up for us in practice. I was highlighting the person's autonomy and freedom, and there was drawing some connections back to the ethical decision-making tool, Nadia, that you shared at the beginning. There was some kind of exploration around knowing that a lot of social workers work with the entire family. So you're working with that patient, you're privy to that information. How would your role look like in providing bereavement support for the family ongoing? So knowing that your relationship would likely continue with the family and what that would look like and what challenges that may create in having to know or pretend you don't know the nature of the person's death. There were some questions around legal obligations, like the question of like whether there's a legal obligation for the family to know, and the possibility for conflict or legal action in the future if there is that sense of withholding information from the family. And then also just a sense around this conversation being too early, that there's more information to gather. There's a need to continue exploring, and noting that there was already some kind of like change language with Dominic around no one knowing, and then maybe a couple of folks could know. So just needing a bit more time to explore and sit with the decision and really kind of talk through all the possible, again, like practical and ethical implications, and to give Dominic some time to kind of sit with it. And the need to kind of just gather more information before taking any serious action. So those are the highlights from our conversation, but does anybody want to unmute and share theirs or toss some comments in the chat?
So again, you have now the ability to unmute, or you can put something in the chat. That was group number 4, so we still have not heard from group number 1, 2, or 3. If someone from one of those groups would like to unmute.
This is Dom here. I was in number 2. And while what Linden has shared, was quite sort of connected to some of the things we talked about, the issue of responding to family needs as well as the patient needs kind of puts the social worker in a bit of a dilemma. Because, to what degree do you see the patient as your client? To what degree do you see the family as the client? Does one take precedence over the other? How do you sort of navigate your way through that? And we also talked about how it might be helpful for the social worker to engage in a conversation with the patient about the meaning of dying itself, and how the act of, or the process of dying would be quite different if the person died sort of just by themselves with the clinician there, versus having family there, where family may be able to sort of celebrate that last step with the person and accompany them. The term accompaniment was used, and that they wouldn't be alone, and they might, the patient might feel quite lonely at the very end, and maybe not, I don't know, but it's a possibility. But is basically denying that possibility of accompaniment for themselves, and the possibility of a very fulfilling and rich emotional experience for everybody if they were to accompany the person through their final step there. So
Thank
those
you.
were a couple of key things we came up with.
Thank you. Group number 1 or 3?
Oops. I think I saw as well a comment in the chat from group number 1. Sorry if my screen is being shared and you guys are seeing everything, but I'm pretty sure I saw a comment from group 1 pop up in the chat, Nadia.
Oh, yeah. You know what? It was covered by, yeah, I see that. Group number 1 talked about not using judgmental language, digging into their needs and what they need to feel supported in the process. And other people can add more to group number 1's conversation. If not, thank you for group number 1. Does group number 3 want to offer any additional comments that they might have had? I see the focus is to be on the patient, their wishes, including what and how they want the family to know.
Thanks, everybody. I think a couple other challenges that came up for us, just to kind of add in as you're kind of thinking it through, and you're right, there's no clear answer. We did in a couple of these scenarios, we do like to explore it further with folks, as some of you indicated, and really trying to kind of suss out the reasons why someone may or may not want family to know. And one other kind of practical implication that we have here is that we see family every day. So there's the piece around what do you do with the fact that you know that someone is dying tomorrow at 1:30. Family is coming in that day. Maybe they're going out of province. Maybe they're not going to come in the next day because they're taking a break. Maybe they are coming in the next day at 1:30. And so there's all those kind of pieces too around how do you work with the family where you're trying to maintain someone's privacy and confidentiality while also kind of reducing the harm that may have on the family. So there was no really clear answer, but with most folks, we would kind of sit with it and explore. And often in those conversations, those their own senses around how that may not work in one way or another does come up. Usually folks were able to identify that themselves. And then if not, sometimes there's a piece around informing some people, but not everybody, and still maintaining some of that autonomy and freedom and control, but and their wishes in a different sort of way.
There's another comment also around to what extent does grief counseling function as a type of pressure? So when the patient was, for example, Dominic was saying, no, I don't want anyone. And then I kept exploring a little bit. Oh, well, maybe here, maybe there. Was that Dominic's wish and ambivalence, or was that in response to the social worker's power and the ways in which that question might have been conveying guilt or judgment on some level? And so, which we know that patient is very prone to being concerned about. Mm-hmm. And then there's also, what about self-disclosure by the social worker about their own struggle? So that's another different set of ethical dilemmas, because mm-hmm. as we know, we could do a whole session just on self-disclosure. And in mm-hmm. fact, perhaps we should. But that's a different topic, but it's a related topic in this way as well. So those are a couple of other components. How does our counseling decisions function as a way of honoring the patient's wishes? And how do we balance helping them flesh it out versus potentially moving them to a different place? And is that ethical to do? So with that, I think we are going to think about other scenarios. So yeah. I will let you.
Oh, sorry, Nadia.
No, yes, I will let you.
Sorry. So I'm just also mindful of time. So this is going to be a little bit of a speed run for folks, but we're going to break you up into those, I think, the same groups.
Yes.
And we're each going to have your own scenario this time. So on the screen, you will see scenario 2, 3, 4, and 5. So you just see some highlights. Again, you're operating with minimal information, but keep in mind that practice context. Each group is assigned a different scenario. Again, you're talking as a group around what practical and ethical implications may arise in this. How would we navigate it as a social worker? What questions do we have? And then if there's time, we'll come back as a group to offer some highlights, but we may not have that time. So just really take the time as a group to kind of talk these things through in terms of how you may navigate it.
Thank you. And so scenario 5 is going to be for group number 1. Scenario 2 is for group number 2. Scenario 3 is for group number 3. And scenario 4 is for group number 4. And I will send that into your breakout rooms. So I'm going to open the rooms. Please go back to your respective rooms, and I will also, of course, pause the recording. All right, everyone, we are back, and I know that this was a short time to discuss all of the really important things that we need to discuss, but hopefully it gave you a little bit of a reminder of the importance of colleagueship and peer support and peer networking. And we at the college want to create more opportunities for you to be able to dialogue and connect with other social workers on this really important work. Linden, do you want to finish us off and simply share maybe a little bit about how you all handled some of these scenarios?
Yeah, sure. So thank you everybody for your engagement and your conversation. All is to say that none of these scenarios necessarily kind of came out clean and tidy in terms of working. They all came with more questions. I think that was the takeaway from most of these, is that we just need more time, need more information. There is that constant balance of trying to navigate somebody's individual autonomy and their wishes and their family, their friends, the care team. When you have more than one person in the mix, there's that kind of constant challenge. There's also that question around, like, what is the social worker's true role in this? So are we applying pressure? Are we having the conversation? Are we the gatekeeper? Are we the protector? Like, what is our role in all these things, and what are we inclined to do? And whose discomfort are we working with? So I'd say in most cases, in terms of when family doesn't know, in conversation, usually there is a level of informing people, at least of their intent. So we haven't had to do the completely secretive MAiD death as of yet. Usually folks reach a point of their own volition oftentimes. In terms of not wanting family and friends present at a time of death, we've had that happen multiple times. And so we often will sometimes make sure to expand our support for those families and friends and to give them time to really process what that means for them to not be present at the time of death, and have lots of conversations around who can hold energy for whose grief and what that looks like. And we have done virtual, people who are using the term virtual deaths. We have had that case as well. It was quite beautiful when it happened, but there are all those kind of like questions around when you're broadcasting someone's death, like what that looks like and what that means and how that feels. And unfortunately, with one of these examples, the person was very comfortable and adamant that it happened. We've had spiritual care providers who, of course, come in and are able to operate from a place of non-judgment regardless of their faith background, and support folks and provide support. We've also have spiritual care providers who have made their stance really clear on MAiD, and that sometimes will influence someone's decision whether or not to pursue it and whether or not they'll receive support from that provider going forward. So we've had both circumstances. That one has been a sticky one. And we have had family in great distress about someone not being able to receive MAiD if that's been their preference. And that is tricky as well. And then often we kind of unpack and explore around, okay, what was really important about that person's wish to receive MAiD, and how can we preserve some of those elements in this type of death? Like what key values can we carry over here? So yes, all that to say, none of them were neat and tidy. All of them created great questions and conversations on our team and with patients and with families. And there's no like easy guidebook on how to navigate these, but part of the inspiration today was really to talk them through and start to give some thought about how we might navigate them individually or as a team. So thank you for that. Was hoping for some folks to share some examples, but unfortunately we don't have time for that. But feel free if folks want to reach out to me for any kind of questions or comments or further discussion. I am the only social worker at hospice, so I really do welcome folks to kind of connect and consult and chat. So please feel free to reach out if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Linden. Thank you, Dominic. Thank you all for joining us. And if you don't have Linden's contact information, you can always reach out to me as well, and I can connect you. In that last scenario 5, there was like a little star. I don't know if you noticed it, and it said this happened before pre-consent was an option. And that brings us to session number 3, which is the importance of social justice and advocacy. And while the last 2 sessions have talked about currently the new changes of medical assistance in dying and how we can address it, there are more changes that are coming up. So I want to invite you to join us on the 17th. Dominic and I will be talking a little bit more about some of the ethical and social justice implications of the upcoming changes. And we have a lawyer who is also a professor duly appointed in the law school and the Department of Psychiatry at Dalhousie, Professor Archie Kaiser, and he is has some really brilliant interpretations on this whole situation, and you will not want to miss some of his reflections on the social justice and ethical and legal implications of this. So with that, thank you all so much. These recordings will be available shortly, and please let us know how you're appreciating this.